Hello there, friends. Welcome to yet another BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations number 24. I'm your host, Joe Hannon, the grappler who overthinks everything. I'm back from a long hiatus. Where was I? I was in an undisclosed location in Central America for about a week or so, doing a lot of surfing, which I'm going to talk about on this episode of BJJ Meditations. I promise it has a lot to do with Jiu Jitsu as well, specifically Jiu Jitsu coaching. And then after that, I was on a client visit in Boston, which was very exciting for me. It was my first client facing work in the peak performance consulting space. My first opportunity to really discuss face to face with people the kind of stuff that I discuss camera to face with you all on a somewhat weekly basis. Really apologize for the irregularity of the production schedule, but things just got really crazy really fast. And sometimes you just have to embrace that craziness. You know, that wave crests and you either have to ride it or get smashed by it. And I elected to ride it. And it's been amazing. I think that jiu-jitsu probably more than anything else has prepared me for moments like this. Just because, it's interesting, it's interesting to me anyway. It might not be to you. But the curriculum for this month at Princeton Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is side control. And when we think of side control, it's in the John Danaher sense of things. It's a pin, Joe Rogan. Sorry if my Kiwi accent isn't so good. And that sort of implies a static nature about side control. You're trying to hold this position, maintain it for as long as you can. But side control to me, done well, has a very dynamic energy to it. You're constantly adjusting. You're constantly moving. Unless you're much larger than your opponent, very difficult to actually hold them in place in one location. Same thing with mount. So jiu-jitsu is a way of embodying that dynamic energy, training at moving with these things, much in the way that surfing is similar. And had I not been doing this training for 8 years now, I don't know if I would have handled these crazy transitions I've been navigating in my professional life in the past few weeks. But all that's a long way of saying that I was away for a while and I'm back, and I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be talking to you, camera to face, such as this face is. Face for radio. You people on the podcast, you don't know how good you have it. But yeah, it's good to be back behind the microphone in front of the camera and talking to you all about this beautiful art, which we also love. And I'll do the usual thing. I'll read this week's meditation, talk a little bit about it, and call it a day. Hopefully, I can be a bit more consistent going forward. I don't see any travel in the immediate future, and try and build out a backlog of these things. But it's just hard when you got a 21-month-old son and a wife and a cat that is crazy and cat-like and threatening potentially to die. Just a lot of stuff going on right now. So my apologies to you, but I'm also asking for some grace from you, and I'm asking of myself for some grace too. So shit happens. Anyway, BJJ Meditations number 14, the Rupture of Unsoundness. I'm a beginner again. The ocean stretches before me like a pane of painted glass, strands of white foam striping it at intervals. I am nervous. I can feel it in the way my breath hangs suspended in my chest, my ribs refusing to expand and let air in. I cross the dark sand beach, strewn with hieroglyphs of driftwood. The ocean seems so distant, but before long it's lapping against my pale shins. The surfboard, tucked under my arm, is a wind sail carrying me northward. I drop it in the water and I tell myself that I've done this before. Same water, different board, different people. Before long, I'm popping up and riding the white water consistently. I've had worse. In 2018 or 2019, I paddled out off the dog beach in Asbury Park as a hurricane was barreling toward shore. It was only my second time surfing in anything other than lazy summer conditions in the Northeast, and plummeting down those steeps felt like tumbling off of moving cliffs. I paddled into those waves and was thrown again and again, dreading not the fall, but the climb back over, or more often through, the break. This was nothing by comparison, except this time I had an empathic instructor named Prado watching me in the white water. Prado is also a fighter. He's a world champion judoka. And like any skilled judoka, he knows how to upend your world effortlessly. With a few gentle interventions, my base vanished. My stance, wrong. My ideas of balance, wrong. My hand placement on the rails, wrong. I made these hacks work for me, but they combined to form an unsound foundation. An example. Throughout my limited surfing experience, I had strived to equally distribute my weight between both feet as you would on a balance board, or as you would to avoid a throw or a takedown. In surfing, a more sound approach is to front weight the front foot, turning toes inward instead of forward, which allows the rider to control the board with the front-facing hip and keep their hands suspended over the rails. Suddenly, I had to think about my foot placement, my hand placement, my balance point, things that I had intuited but intuited unsoundly. The pop-up in white water that was once available to me had vanished. The realization nudged me into Rupture, a familiar but long absent acquaintance. I've been training Jiu Jitsu for almost 8 years. Rupture, the revelation of profound unsoundness, comes less frequently when you're a brown belt. I'd nearly forgotten the panic it provokes, the feeling of falling overboard and watching the boat speed over the horizon. This happens often for the blue belt, the white belt, and we, the instructors, are the architects of that experience. How do we orchestrate it with kindness, empathy, compassion, a light touch? How do we handle it like Prado? Yeah, so rupture and unsoundness, probably two weird terms, maybe weird terms to you, especially in the sense that I'm using it. Rupture is something that I've experienced countless times in jiu-jitsu. And most recently, I'd say the most profound and recent experience of rupture I had was the radical shift of my worldview that came to pass after COVID-19. Like, I'm sure many of you can remember life before and after COVID. That was a collective rupture moment for society. Or if you're an old geezer like me and you can remember 9/11, you can remember life pre and post 9/11. I think this is especially acute for people who grew up in the Northeast or New Jersey or New York. I imagine that Pearl Harbor was much in the same way for my grandparents. You know, things that you thought were possible or things that made sense suddenly seem impossible or no longer make sense. Your worldview is just exploded in an instant. And I think that this is one of the most troubling aspects of learning jiu-jitsu for many people, because if you think about it, unless you're a high-level wrestler, I shouldn't even say high-level wrestler, unless you are a wrestler and you come into jiu-jitsu, it's like nothing else athletically that you've ever done before. And athleticism certainly is going to help you, but probably less so than it would, say, a football player transitioning to basketball or a basketball player transitioning to baseball. It's really an apples to oranges situation. And in many ways, the things that would serve you in the transitions between those sports don't serve you in jiu-jitsu. You know, they actually might harm you. And it could be the way you place your feet, the way you distribute your weight, the way you stand, the way you change your level. These things can actually be a detriment. So yeah, jiu-jitsu throws you into that moment of rupture where maybe it's not your worldview, but it's your view of what it means to be an active adult just gets upended over and over and over again, like a judoka is just throwing you on your head over and over and over again. And I had this experience learning to surf that I'm sure many of you, if you have surfed, had, where it's just kind of like hazing trial by fire, much like learning jiu-jitsu in the earlier days, and even to a certain extent today, is a matter of hazing and trial by fire. So I asked a bunch of friends who surfed, like, hey, how should I learn to do this? And they all said, oh man, you just gotta I'm from New Jersey, so if you grew up around the shore and you surf, you do talk like this, I assure you. Like, hey man, you just gotta get out there. You just gotta feel it. You gotta get in the flow. You gotta get on the board. Just go out there. Just go. And, I did that. And eventually I was able to figure out, after eating shit long enough how to get up on a very large and buoyant soft top board and eventually ride green waves. And Prado, right away, when I was in this undisclosed location in Central America, was able to see, oh yeah, I see what you're doing. You're doing X, Y, and Z, and it's all wrong. Of course, he didn't deliver it in that way. It was delivered in this very loving, kind, gentle, light touch way, and he could tell right away when I was overloaded. He could tell right away when I was thinking about too much, trying to entertain too many variables, and I was just locked up. And there was actually a moment where I think we were trying to surf green waves, which is something I could do before until I discarded I discarded everything I knew about surfing because I was surfing in an unsound way. And he said, okay, I think he had coached me on how I think it was what I was doing with my back foot. And it was like another light touch intervention he had made, and he could tell I was thinking about that too much. And he said, you know what, just forget it. Go back to what you were doing. And just like that, I was able to start riding waves again. And by the end of the session, my foot placement was better. So like he knew when to back away. He knew when to intervene. He knew how to intervene. He knew the right language to use. He knew the right framing. He knew the right tone. And surfing and jiu-jitsu are both emotionally volatile in similar ways. Like, people have a lot of trauma associated with the water. This is something that I've kind of known intellectually, but I've never, fortunately, my trauma is confined to other things. It's not specific to water. I quite enjoy the water, and I always have. But I was around people on this trip who had very traumatic experiences, either as children or even as adults, in the water. And just to like commit yourself to the ocean and to surfing, knowing that history, like it takes a lot of courage. And I mean, it just in the same way, it takes a lot of courage to willingly say, hey, yeah, I'm going to go and subject myself to simulated murder, strangulation, and limb dismemberment with these total strangers, and just trust that everything's going to be okay. It's a major leap of faith. And eventually, as you all know, and you do this enough, you kind of get a bit of nerd to it, and you can handle it. The traumatic aspects of it are not so apparent, and you realize that they're not so traumatic at all. And then you get to this point where you actually learn to love it, and you begin to transcend it, and it begins to make you a better person. But there's like a lot of stuff. There's, in my case, 8 years of stuff that has to happen before you get to that level of transcendence. So I kind of pose this meditation to all the instructors out there. Like, how do we be more like Prado? How do we guide people by the hand throughout this journey of jiu-jitsu, but at the same time maintain its martialness, right? Because like, this is still a fight. We don't want to detract from that. We still want people to appreciate that this is a fight, and we're training you in this proven martial art that could potentially save your life. And even if you're just going to look at it from a sport perspective, guess what? If you're going to compete, it's a fight. There's no getting around that very sharp edge, right? Like, that sharp edge is going to cut you no matter what. But how can we kind of prepare people for that better? And then the other takeaway I had from this experience is more global to all of us practitioners of this art. And it's this idea of seeking moments of rupture, rooting out the unsoundness. I'm sure that there are elements of my jiu-jitsu that I have yet to uncover that are unsound. I know this because every time I train, every time I take a lesson with somebody, I find another one. And I would hope that there are fewer of them now than when I started, but there certainly are elements of unsoundness in my game. And there's this protective nature that can settle in, especially when you're somebody who's been doing this for a while. I think it's in part an egoic thing. In part, it could be informed by past traumatic experiences. In part, it could just be pure personality, elements of your personality that are at play. But we have this reluctance to go there. Like, we can all think these are extreme examples, but think back to how your worldview shifted pre and post 9/11. Think how your worldview shifted pre and post COVID. Like, none of us really want to go back to that, right? But those were transformative learning experiences, I hope, for everybody who lived through them. So how can we kind of reframe these moments of rupture that come along in jiu-jitsu as true learning moments? For example, I haven't competed since my son was born 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. I just signed up for my first comp, which is going to be on June 11th. And there's a strong part of me that is very protective of where I've gotten myself to, how far I've come, who I am as a brown belt, who I am as an instructor. And I hate competing. I hate what it does to me emotionally. I hate the experience of it top to bottom, but I love the growth that comes out of it. And I'm adamant that if you're serious about this martial art, there's really no better way to level up and to grow and to learn than to compete. So it's a tough path, but like, you got to walk it straight step by step. This is something I tell my students, something I tell myself, and I have to walk that talk, right? But there's a protective element there, because some of my most profound moments of rupture in jiu-jitsu have come from the exposure of competition. Like, I had just gotten my purple belt, thought I was hot shit. I had done decently at the Atlanta Open, signed up for a local tournament, and I figured, like, I'll just do this to get ready for the next tournament. Got my ass handed to me by some guy I'd never seen before. And I got my ass handed to me because I was playing butterfly guard all wrong. I was just accepting one of his underhooks. I was letting him have an underhook when I should have just been violently fighting for double unders at all costs. So I would try to sweep him, and I would essentially pull himself on top of me. Major fundamental flaw, major moment of fundamental unsoundness, major moment of rupture. I remember talking to Emily afterward, and it just felt like I was a colossal disappointment. This is me. This is not coming from her. I felt like I had colossally disappointed or let down the school in some like irreparable way because I let this guy beat me in such a foolish way. But I don't do that anymore. If you try, and I'm probably not going to play butterfly guard against you anymore. But if I happen to be doing it, guess what? I'm going to fight like hell for those double unders. And I won't get into all of them, but I've had similar experiences in competition. So there's a part of me that's loath to go back there, right? To seek that rupture and that exposure of unsoundness. And then there's another part of me that's like, yeah, but that's the point. That's where you have to go. And that's why I'm going. So here goes. June 11th, I step back out on the mat. It's a little local comp. We'll see what happens. It'll be my first win as brown belt. And I plan on doing Masters Worlds in August and taking you all along for the ride with me. Perhaps we can all seek moments of rupture and root out our collective unsoundness together. But I think that's about all I have to say. I have more to say on a tangentially related subject, which I'll get into next week. But that's it for now. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. As always, best way to support BJJ Meditations is to go to Mirror. It's a blog site on the Ethereum blockchain. If you want to financially support me, you can buy one of these essays as NFTs on Mirror. You don't have to. This is always going to be free. I'm happy to do it. If you enjoyed the podcast, if you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, review, share. Tell somebody about BJJ Meditations who might benefit from it. Tell somebody about Jiu Jitsu in general who might benefit from it. Joe, if you're out there, thanks for turning me on to this sport 8 years ago. As always, best way to stay abreast of all things BJJ Meditations is on Instagram. We're BJJ_meditations. If you enjoy my writing, you can get more non-specific BJJ or non-BJJ related material over at johannon.substack.com. And of course, come train with me. Princeton Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Princeton, New Jersey. Emily and I and the other owners are always happy to have guests. You're all more than welcome to come train, and I would love to meet you and interact with you in person. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and we will be back to our scheduled programming from here on out. Take care.